Well, hello. Thank you for coming here and checking out my family's story. It's actually my father's story, Henry Cass, and he wrote this for his grandson, Anders Cass, in 2005. You see, my son had been diagnosed with a brain tumor that could have killed him. And so this surgery was to save his life. So it was a very, very dark time. And I think to comfort my son and motivate him to survive and to comfort himself, my dad wrote this story for Anders. It all turned out well. Anders had the tumor removed. He graduated from high school, he graduated from college, and now he works with youth in Oregon. And he's a fine young man. He's 27 years old, so he's doing great. But this story was read to Anders just before he went into surgery by his grandpa. So I hope that you enjoy it. Nuomi and the Bow. Once, far to the north, where the great birch and pine forests grow, there lived a boy named Nuomi. He lived in a small cabin at the edge of a vast wood with his grandfather, Suomi, the archer. It was said that Suomi had once been the finest archer in all the Northlands. People still bowed and averted their eyes when he walked about the village out of respect for the old warrior. Far and wide, Nuomi knew that people still told the story of Suomi and the emperor, about how the emperor and his army passed through the village, drafting every male 12 to 18 years old for service. Somehow, word of Suomi's skill had also reached the monarch's ear. To satisfy his curiosity, the king challenged Suomi to show his bow skill. Suomi agreed, but only if the emperor would end the war in the south and release all the young men to return to their homes. The potentate thought about it for the rest of the day, and so, just as the sun set, the king's curiosity got the better of him, and the emperor agreed to Suomi's bargain. Instantly, Suomi picked up his massive longbow, knocked a yew-wood arrow, and drew the heavy bow cord taut. Everyone watched the archer. Even with daylight failing fast, his piercing blue eyes sought a target, scanning across the snow-covered clearing to the tree line some 300 yards away. For minutes, he kept the bow at full draw without the slightest tremble. Then, without warning, he released the shaft, and a bolting white-furred rabbit dropped dead at the tree line. None but Suomi had even seen it. The emperor was astonished, and the next day, 6,000 young men returned to their homes, the war averted. But that was long ago. Now Suomi's eyes were dim, and for the most part, he spent his days comfortably dozing by the fire with his old loyal hunting dog, Eno. Each day, Nuomi would spy with wonder his grandfather's mighty yew bow and quiver of fine ash arrows, which hung by a stout peg near the fireplace. And each day he would ask, "When may I draw the bow, grandfather? When will it be mine?" Grandfather would always reply, "Oh, perhaps when you are a man grown enough to draw it tight and shoot it straight," he would say with a chuckle, scratching old Eno between the ears. 2 years passed. Nuomi grew as tall as a young pine and as supple as the birches growing by the cabin door. Then, in the third year, the winter snows stayed late. Then, only grudgingly gave way to cold spring rains that never seemed to end. The young wheat and barley seed rotted in the fields. Hunger and sickness steadily crept over the land. Then one dark day, Nuomi fell grievously ill too. Grandfather, deep worry etched in the worn lines of his face, put the boy to bed and called for the herb woman. She came at once, but none of her potions, poultices, or charms did any good. She shook her head in defeat as she left the cabin. That night, Nuomi's fever grew even higher, and he finally slipped into a dark slumber, hanging just between life and death. Into this twilight, Nuomi suddenly awoke. He found himself in a strange forest, unlike any he had ever seen. Weird, towering black trees shut out the sky, while the shadows of their twisting limbs slithered about him as if they were enormous, writhing snakes. Worse yet, The tree branches suddenly laced their gnarled limbs so tightly together that they completely barred the path ahead, the same path Nuomi felt sure must lead him home. No matter how he tried, the lad could see no way to pass through the mass of greedy, dancing limbs and shadows. I am lost, Nuomi cried out to the caged sky, tears threatening then. There is no hope of finding a way forward. My path is blocked. A moment passed, then, think again, said a strangely familiar voice just next to him. It sounded like his grandfather's strong voice. Nuomi whirled to see the speaker, looking to see where the voice had come from. To his amazement, he realized it was coming from old Eno. The shaggy dog had somehow appeared here and silently padded up next to Nuomi, bearing Suomi's great yew bow. And there was the quiver of ashwood arrows tied neatly to the dog's scruffy back by a long leather thong. As Nuomi looked into the dog's fearless eyes, he heard Suomi's voice again. Ignore the shadows, Nuomi, warned his grandfather's steady voice. Instead, quiet your mind and calm your heart. Only then should you look carefully at those trees. If you are brave and strong enough to master your fears, you will be able to spy the way out and find the light of home. When you see it, take up my bow and shoot an arrow at the very center of that light. If you strike it true, the path back to me will open up to you. But grandfather, cried Nuomi, looking down at the old dog, you have always said it takes a man grown to draw your bow, and a strong man at that. Take up my bow, Nuomi. You are a young man, but a man grown nonetheless. As for strength, I know no heart stronger than yours. Take it up, knock an arrow, and draw the string. You will see. So Nuomi closed his eyes and pictured his grandpa pulling the mighty bowstring. His heart calmed and his mind cleared. Confident now, he untied the leather thong and took up the great bow in his hands. Then he set a smooth arrow to the bowstring and finally pulled the mighty bowstring back. He anticipated difficulty, but to his surprise, the bowstring pulled back easily in his suddenly strong hands. Nuomi held the bowstring taut against his cheek as he slowed his breathing further and stared into the writhing black mass of tree limbs in front of him. It seemed an eternity past, searching for any sign of light. All the while, he could see nothing but roiling, seething blackness. He felt despair clawing at the back of his mind. Focus! He yelled at the blackness. Now he quieted his thudding heart and mastered his fears. Summoning all of his remaining will, Nuomi sought the light of home. Suddenly, it appeared. Just the tiniest speck of light in a sea of darkness ahead. Now fearless and sure of himself, Nuomi aimed for the tiny point of light and let fly his arrow. Straight and true the yew-wood bolt flew, and where its steel point cut the air, the huge tree's black branches groaned and snapped back in a flurry of black leaves. When Nuomi's arrow flew into the very heart of the light, a roaring hiss erupted from the trees. Within a heartbeat, sunlight pierced the cold, dark forest. When Nuomi's arrow flew into the very heart of the light, a roaring hiss erupted from the trees. Within a heartbeat, sunlight pierced the cold, dark forest, flooding it with warmth and golden light. A moment later, there in front of Nuomi lay the path to home, as straight and true as the flight of his arrow. The once malevolent trees now stood proudly silent and peaceful on either side. The warmth of the sunlight filled him with a new joy. Then all at once, Nuomi realized that the golden light shining in his eyes was actually the sun streaming through the windows of the cabin. He was awake. His deadly fever had finally broken. Best of all, grandfather was smiling down at him as Eno licked his pale hand. He was weak and still lightheaded, but he knew his question could not wait. The dream! Was it, am I a man grown, grandfather? I drew and shot your great yew bow, and I hit the point of light straight and true as you told me I should. Grandpa, you saved me. Suomi the archer did not answer, as a tear of relief trickled down his cheek. Quietly, he turned and took his bow from the wall where it hung, and, saying a last goodbye to his old friend, laid the longbow and its quiver of yew arrows on the coverlet in front of the young man. Nuomi stroked the smooth arch of the bow with wonder. He did not really need to answer to his question now. Both he and grandfather knew Nuomi was at last a man grown. I hope you've enjoyed the story. Thanks for listening.